And so basically, Geoffrey de Charnay I will lose his life in battle protecting the King of France. His family will sell it to the House of Savoy as they fall on hard times. And basically, the House of Savoy was controlling southern France and northern Italy. And they are coming under attack by Protestants, new iconoclasts, the Huguenots. They're trying to drive the Duke of Savoy out of his territory in southern France. And they will succeed. But the Duke is looking for a way out of Chambéry, France, in a face-saving gesture. Way to save face. He's a great man, great family. This was their headquarters. And St. Charles Borromeo will give him his excuse. A great plague is going through the city of Milan. And St. Charles Borromeo prays to the Lord. He says, Lord, if you lift this plague against the citizens of Milan, I will cross the Swiss Alps barefoot to venerate your burial cloth, which was then in Chambéry, France, across the Swiss Alps. Could you imagine vowing to the Lord to cross the Swiss Alps barefoot? Our God of great mercy, here's St. Charles's prayer. The plague is lifted. St. Charles sets off on his journey to venerate the cloth in Chambéry, France. And again, in God's mercy, the Duke of Savoy hears of this. And he says, we will not let this great man cross the Swiss Alps barefoot. We'll cross it for him. And he brings the cloth from Chambéry to Turin, Italy. And in 1578, here's a stylized drawing where the cloth actually goes. I'm sorry, this is St. John the Baptist Cathedral, where the Duke of Savoy brings the cloth, and where it's been since 1578 in the city of Turin, Italy. Here's the Duke's palace over here. And here's a stylized drawing of St. Charles Borromeo venerating the Lord's burial cloth in St. John the Baptist Cathedral in 1578. And from that time till today, we call the cloth the Shroud of Turin, a name change. We no longer call it the Mandilion. And remember, back in those days when you wanted to make sure people understood the authenticity of something, it was always of. It wasn't Jesus of Bethesda, it was Jesus of Nazareth. That was the real McCoy. It wasn't the Shroud of Paris, it was the Shroud of Turin. That's the real McCoy. I like to explain to people who come to the Shroud Center that one of the easiest ways the evil one has to fool mankind is this: generational forgetfulness and name changes. Time marches on, people forget, names change, and remember, the evil one can do nothing but mimic. He cannot create. So he has to come in. He takes those kernels of truth, perverts them, and suddenly you've got heresy, blasphemy, incorrect doctrines, and dogmas, etc. Edessa no longer exists today. It's now called Urfa. And the 300 churches the Edessans built to Jesus of Nazareth over 900 years are now all mosques. Does Constantinople exist anymore? Does it? It's now called Istanbul. And Istanbul is the Muslim war cry of 1453, into the city. That's what Istanbul means. And they will desecrate Hagia Sophia. The icons were recently restored by American scientists in the 1960s. Those icons had been lost. So, that's one of the easiest ways for the evil one to fool us: generational forgetfulness and name changes. So we don't call the cloth the Mandilion, we call it the Shroud of Turin. And that's how the critics get away with telling you the cloth is a forgery. They tell you about the carbon-14 dating test, and as a logical human being, you think to yourself, well, yeah, how could this be Jesus' burial cloth? How could it be called the Shroud of Turin? He was in Jerusalem when he was buried. So that's the story. And that's why I spend so much time on the history of the Shroud. Is everything perfect? No. Is it as much as we can understand? Yes. Does science back this story up? You better believe it. Now, who is this person? Jesus. You're absolutely right. How do you know that? You read the scriptures, and John and the other gospel writers, Luke, Mark, and Matthew tell you, oh yeah, Jesus, he had long hair, he had owl eyes, he had a beard and a mustache, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what the scriptures say? No, the scriptures don't tell you one iota of what Jesus looks like. How come you all instinctually recognize this as Jesus? I've had 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds come to the Shroud Center. They look at these portraits and they go, oh yeah, that's Jesus. They know. Well, this is the first century catacombs. The early Christians had no problem showing icons of Jesus, Mary, Peter, and Paul, and the other saints. They went to their deaths for Jesus. If it's good enough for them, then images of Jesus and Mary are good enough for me. They weren't fooling around about their faith. And so basically, they knew what he looked like. But when the catacombs came into disuse, this is from 90 AD, when the catacombs came into disuse after Constantine the Great legalized the church, by the 500s, the image of Christ had been forgotten in history. People were making Jesus look like a Greek god. He had no Semitic features, no beard. He looked like he was about 19 years old, almost as if he was Apollo. But in 525 AD, something very significant happens. In Edessa, Turkey, they had come under persecution for their religious beliefs for a period of time, and they lost the Mandylion. In 525 AD, the city of Edessa was almost wiped off the face of the earth by a major flood. 30,000 people lose their lives in this flood. And this Byzantine icon shows you the Edessans rediscovering the Mandylion, the cloth, the burial cloth of the Lord, and the west gate of Edessa, where tradition held no dead body was allowed to be brought through that gate in deference to Jude Thaddeus bringing the resurrected Christ on the cloth through that gate. And when they rediscover the image of Jesus on the Mandylion, they rediscover the face of Christ. And the Byzantine monks will do this in 550 AD. Who is this person? Jesus again. And here we have, again, the long hair, the owl eyes, the beard. Notice also he's got a sneer on his mouth. He's got chapped lips. This is not a flattering portrait of Christ. Why? The Byzantine monks are like scribes. They wouldn't dare change a jot or tittle of a sacred scripture. Byzantine iconographers wouldn't dare change a jot or tittle of a sacred icon. And so when they're copying the Mandylion, they're copying it right to the point of everything. And they're copying the face of a beaten man. And notice here, there's a bruise underneath this eye. Now, let's take a look at the Shroud of Turin. Here it is. Wow. Look at the white and the lips. They're chapped. Look at also the bruise underneath the eye. Dr. Alan Wanger, a friend of ours, tried to disprove the shroud. He wanted to be one of those guys who could tell the world why this can't possibly be Jesus' burial cloth. And he knew that if he tried to see whether these Byzantine icons in the face of the Shroud of Turin were one and the same, he'd need at least 60 points of agreement to prove that one image was the same as the other. So Dr. Wanger took Christ the Almighty Ruler, as it's known by the Byzantines, from 550 AD, and the Shroud of Turin's face, and he matched them up. And he did not get 60 points of agreement. He did it. He got 246 points of agreement. 246. More than 4 times the limit to prove one object is the same as the other. Notice his overlay here of Christ the Almighty Ruler and the Shroud of Turin. Do they match up, my friends? Look at the bruise underneath the eye. Seeing is believing. Notice the owl shapes in the eyes as well. It's kind of interesting too, because it makes the eyes of the shroud look like they're open, because the Byzantine icon eyes are open. Now this is a coin the Byzantines struck in the year 692 AD. It's the first coin we know of with the face of Christ on it. Justinian II is the Emperor of Constantinople. He's gone to Edessa, Turkey to venerate the Mandylion, and he has his artisans make this coin. It's about the size of a nickel. The flip side is Justinian II's face. That's how much he wanted to be associated with the Mandylion. And once again, look at these areas. Flattened nose, slits in the eye, the way the beard is, the way the hair is matted. And when Dr. Wanger took this coin and matched it up, I want to show you this. Here's the flattened nose right here. Now we're going to switch to the overlays with the shroud. And look at that. It fits perfectly. This is not the U.S. Mint, my friends. This is the Byzantine minting of 692 AD on a nickel. Yet look how close it is to the Shroud of Turin's face.